guess he was a arch enemy of the Green Lantern. Again, I don't know anything about that, but it was a guy that was named the Fool. And the thing about the arch enemies, or good guys, bad guys, it didn't really matter. But in the comic books, they always had this origin story. How did they get to where they were? And so that's what was going through my mind as I was thinking about this. How did that fool become who the fool was? So you look at this person. I'm going to try to paint the image of this one person, but of course this applies to lots of people all throughout the world. But just one person, if we could just put these characteristics that we see from this passage of Scripture into one person, call him the fool. What does that mean? So real quickly, just by way of study, just a little etymology of the word fool. It comes from a Latin word that literally means bellows. Anybody know what a bellow is? If you start a fire, or say you got a fireplace or whatever, and you want to really get that going and get those coals, there's a little leather bag or something that you can do like this, and it blows the air on that and it gets it. So there's different ways that you can do it. That's the one that I'm thinking in my mind. And, if you go back and think about what that is, it's literally, and here's the definition. I mean, you can look it up. The etymology of the word fool means this: windbag. Windbag. So you want to call someone a fool, you might as well just say, you windbag. I remember Valerie's grandpa, Brother A.F. Collins, before he passed away, when he was preaching, he would teach you a lot of stuff, but he also had a lot of comedy he used in there, like stories from his past that he would tell, and he'd just kind of leave you rolling. But one of these times he was at a preacher's meeting or something. He got up and he was talking about how he had a bad day and nothing was going right. And he's explaining all the bad things. And he's like, then I got in my car and I looked up and he... So anyway, I just thought that whenever I said windbag. What was it, windbag? It's just full of air. Just blowing air, just blowing, nothing. It's just full of air. And this is a fool, empty. Okay, so empty-headed is one thing that you think about, and this is what it means by fool. Now, we use the word today to describe either, and it's always kind of been this way, either somebody who's ignorant, that's your next blank, meaning that he just lacks knowledge or common sense, not bright, maybe just hasn't learned yet, maybe he's new on the job or something like that, and so he doesn't know, he's kind of ignorant. Technically, it wouldn't be incorrect to call him a fool because by that definition, because he just lacks the knowledge of the common sense. Or we would use it to talk about somebody who's silly. Okay, in fact, in the Bible, that word is used kind of interchangeably with somebody who's silly or foolish. Means that they are just behaving absurdly or ridiculously. Of course, you might think about the court gesture. That was called a fool, somebody who would just try to entertain the king. From what I understand about those, if you read about that position or whatever, they weren't really fools. They were really smart and they knew how to talk to the king and get him to do things, but they acted, I think some of them really were mentally challenged and stuff. But a lot of those guys, from what I understand, had to be really smart, because if they did the wrong thing, they could get their head cut off or something like that. But anyway, the reason that they call them the fool is because of the way they act, because they're acting real silly and goofy, and so they're a fool. Look at Proverbs 22. Hold your place in Romans 1. We're coming right back, but go to Proverbs 22, verse 15, and I want to show you this, that there's a certain amount of foolishness that abounds in all of us from the time that we are born, really. Bible says that I was born speaking lies. All right, and there's certain things that we do that are foolish from the time we're born. Verse 15 says, "Foolishness is bound in the heart of a child, but the rod of correction shall drive it far from him." So, could be some people that are just foolish because they never were disciplined. They never had it driven from them. That foolishness driven from them. Okay, foolishness is bound in the heart of a child, but the rod of correction will drive it far from them. So, I just wanted to show you that all of us can do foolish things. All of us can be ignorant and not knowing. Think about the things that the Apostle Paul did. Killing, murder, being responsible for murdering Christians and putting people to their death or delivering them over or whatever. He would probably say that was a foolish thing to do. In fact, many times as he's talking in there, he calls himself a fool, but you have to have the context of those verses. But so think about the things that he did, but then he says, you know what, I did these ignorantly. He didn't do them because he was just a wicked person. I mean, yes, he was a wicked person. Yes, we're all sinners. He did it because he wasn't educated. He didn't have the knowledge. He was educated, but unto the wrong thing. He didn't have the Word of God and really know what the truth was. Although God was working in his heart, and the Holy Spirit was kicking, was pricking his heart, and he was kicking against the pricks. But ultimately, he says, I did all those foolish things because I was ignorant. All of us can do foolish things in our life. And maybe somebody even say, you fool, Don't get too offended by that, because the truth is sometimes we are foolish. Sometimes we are fools, and we do some dumb things. Okay, but when I'm talking about that for this Romans 1 type fool, I'm talking about somebody who's just full-blown fool with a capital F. I mean, they've given themselves to this, and they've become this quintessential fool. Okay, those are the fools that we're talking about in Romans chapter 1 that I'm talking about. He says, those professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. Okay, and then it's going to describe in this passage what the fool looks like. Okay, now again, I'm going to ascribe all this just to one person as if it's just one, the fool just personified here as one person. What does that fool look like? Here's the current condition of a fool according to Romans chapter 1. He does things, and these are a little bit different order. They're not all exactly in chronological order, but he does things and has pleasure in them who do things that are worthy of death. Okay, now this is the fool we're talking about. This is the end result of somebody who is this person I'm talking about, who has become this fool. They do things that are worthy of death, and they have pleasure in those who do things worthy of death. Now, I've heard people basically take this Romans 1 and say, well, we all are worthy of death because we've all sinned. And that's true. We are worthy of the second death, first death and second death, because we're all sinners. There's a point that a man wants to die. And you go with the story of Adam and Eve, and thou shalt surely die, and we understand that. We read in Romans later on, he's going to say, by one man sin entered into the world, and death passed among all men, for that all have sinned. Right? We are all sinners, and so we all deserve to die. But when I say those that are worthy of death, I'm talking about every human being knows that if you do this, you should be put to death. Now, there are some things that we wouldn't. We would say, no, I don't believe in the death penalty. Maybe nobody in here would say that, but a lot of Christians will say, I don't believe in the death penalty. I think that people should just, get second chances or have some mercy or whatever. And maybe they'll even take some of these sins and say, well, they're really not that bad of sins. I don't know why the Bible makes such a big deal about them. But I would say that if it's a sin worthy of death, a person who does it, I'm talking about unsaved person, saved person, whatever. If they do one of these sins, they should be something in their heart, something that they feel that says, man, that was messed up. I shouldn't have done that, right? If they would do that. But the fool is just, he does them, doesn't even think about them. In fact, he takes pleasure in he wants to get other people to do the same thing. Sins that the Bible says are worthy of death. And so look at verse 32, back to Romans 1. Verse 32. Now again, this is the person who professed himself to be wise and became a fool. 31 says, 32. Who knowing the judgment of God, that they which commit such things are worthy of death, not only do the same, but have pleasure in them that do them. This is the fool. This is what the fool looks like right now. Does things and it has pleasure in those who do these things. Now, as Christians, obviously, sometimes we could maybe enjoy the entertainment of the world. We could enjoy certain things that we grew up. We thought this was fun or whatever. But as Christians, look, there's no place for us to have pleasure in those people that are doing wicked, right? Now, I've told you this before. I love entertainment. I've fought my whole life. I've always wanted to watch TV, watch movies and all that kind of stuff. And if I went up and down, sometimes I'm like, I'm not going to watch any more movies or any TV. And then other times I'm less like watching stuff because I like entertainment. And but the thing is, like, oftentimes when I start watching something and I see people that are living in sin, I'm just smitten with this guilt. Like, why am I watching this? Why am I laughing at this? What that person did is a sin. I remember... I don't know. I don't want to start naming things, but there's, you name it, really. Anything the world puts out, you start watching that and you're just like, oh, this is such a good show. This is so fun. But if you really start breaking it down from a Christian perspective, hey, these people are doing wicked things. Why would we want to have pleasure in them? But the fool, he not only enjoys doing these things, but he has pleasure in those people that are doing it. He just consumes it. I don't understand, don't raise your hand if you've ever been into horror films, but I don't understand people that are just into just like demon, horror, ghost stories and all that kind of stuff. Since I was a little bitty kid, that stuff just creeped me out, and I was like, I don't understand the fun in watching this stuff, And then how about just things that glorify violence and killing and all that stuff? If you really think about it, why do we get enjoyment out of that? That shouldn't bring joy to our hearts to watch that kind of stuff. People sleeping around. Every show nowadays has talking about people sleeping around and everything. Anything that's put out by the world that Satan is just having a field day, just giving this stuff and presenting it to us on a plate. And understand the fool just loves that stuff, just eats it up. And maybe it makes them feel better because other people are enjoying it too and participating in it as well. It's gotten to where any show that maybe I watched as a younger person and I thought, hey, this was a great show. I'll just give you an example. We watched Star Trek whenever we were younger. Now, Star Trek has got a lot of like stupid like what do you call it, like evolutionary type stuff and science fiction and stuff like that, but it never was a big deal. Growing up we understood that was all just science fiction, but we would watch it and we'd be entertained. So years later they came out with this new one. I mean, just like fairly recently. I don't remember the name of it or anything. And for whatever reason, we sat down, watched it, said, hey, this looks like it could be entertaining. This looks like it could be fun. And I don't think they were like I think we watched a couple episodes. I don't think they were like 2 or 3 shows in where all of a sudden they introduced this, one of the characters is a lesbian. And like they made a big deal about it, but they didn't like, it was like supposed to be like natural. Like, you know what I mean? It wasn't less like, oh, we're going to introduce this character and it's some odd thing. It's just supposed to be like natural. Like everybody should just accept it. And we were just immediately like, shut that thing off, never watching that again. But look, you can't nowadays watch hardly any show where they don't introduce a homosexual couple. They introduce some kind of a weird situation. I remember going way back in the 90s, they had that, I just remember the title, like, Queer Eye for a Straight Guy or something like that. I don't even remember. I don't know anything about the show, never watched it. I just remember everybody's like, what is the world coming to? Television is introducing this kind of stuff. Little did we know the day would come where it's like there's not going to be not even a cartoon. PBS cartoon, Arthur. You remember that little, what is he, Aardvark or something like that? I don't know what Arthur is. I can't remember. They had to have an episode where he was marrying, the teacher was a man and he was marrying another man, and they made this whole episode about it, and it was just like, oh, no big deal. This is great. It's like, look, the world, why would they do that? Because they have pleasure in those that do them. And little by little, they're building up this appetite for the world to like look at that stuff and causing a lot of people to kind of go down that road. All right, so what are we talking about? Things that are worthy of death. Well, look at Leviticus chapter 20. A lot of these same things are mentioned. Oh man, I lost my place. A lot of these things are mentioned in chapter 19, but there aren't judgments that go with it. It's just like, you go into this land. If you go into the promised land, it's going to be wicked, and you're going to have to get all these people out of the land. And it's talking about the different sins that they're involved in. And then when you get to chapter 20, it starts listing all these things. And basically, along with those sins, it's telling you what the punishment is of those sins. I'll just read it real quickly just to give you an idea of some things. It's not pleasant to read by any means, but just some things that we're talking about here. Because you're like, who would do these things? But, maybe in our world today, some of these things we don't necessarily, it's not open in front, like everybody just sees people doing them. But if you can apply some of the traits of some of the things that are going on there. Just an example, offering your children to Molech, right? So, well, no one offers children to Molech anymore, but couldn't we make an application there that would really be fitting? I mean, there's so many ways we can go. I've heard it with abortion. I've heard it with, different things that you're letting your kids be involved in, and you're just offering them to Molech. I mean, you can make some application there, but regardless, here's what was going on in that day in the book of Leviticus. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Again, thou shalt say to the children of Israel, Whosoever he be of the children of Israel, or of the strangers that sojourn in Israel, that giveth any of his seed unto Molech, he shall surely be put to death. And people of the land shall stone him with stones. And I will set my face against that man, and will cut him off from among his people, because he hath given of his seed unto Molech, to defile my sanctuary and to profane my holy name. And if the people of the land do anyways hide their eyes from the man when he giveth of his seed unto Molech, and kill him not, then I will set my face against that man and against his family, and will cut him off and all that go a-whoring after him to commit whoredom with Molech from among their people. And the soul that turneth after such as have familiar spirits, and after wizards, to go a-whoring after them, I will even set my face against that soul, and will cut him off from among his people. Sanctify yourself, therefore, and be ye holy, for I am the Lord your God. And ye shall keep my statutes and do them. I am the Lord which sanctifieth you. Sanctify you. For everyone that curseth his father or his mother shall be surely put to death. There you go, children. There's the verse right for you. If you curse your mother or father, you shall be put to death. He that curseth his father or mother, his blood shall be upon him. And realize what God is saying in all these situations is He's saying, look, it's better for the land, it's better for the people if this person is put to death. And so don't mourn it, don't feel bad for them. Their blood is upon them because they did this thing. And the man that committeth adultery with another man's wife, even he that committeth adultery with his neighbor's wife, and the adulterer and adulteress shall surely be put to death. And the man that lieth with his father's wife hath uncovered his father's nakedness. Both of them shall surely be put to death. Their blood shall be upon them. And if a man lie with his daughter-in-law, both of them shall surely be put to death. They have wrought confusion. Their blood shall be upon them. If a man also lie with mankind as he lieth with woman, both of them hath committed an abomination. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood shall be upon them. And if a man take a wife and her mother, it is wickedness. They shall be burned with fire, both he and they, that there be no wickedness among you. And if a man lie with a beast, he shall surely be put to death, and ye shall slay the beast. And if a woman approach unto any beast and lie down thereunto, thou shalt kill the woman and the beast. Thou shalt surely be put to death. Their blood shall be upon them. And if a man shall take his sister, his father's daughter, or his mother's daughter, and see her nakedness, and she see his nakedness, it is a wicked thing, and they shall be cut off in the sight of their people. He hath uncovered his sister's nakedness. He shall bear his iniquity. And if a man having her sickness and shall uncover her nakedness, he hath discovered her fountain, and she hath uncovered the fountain of her blood, and both of them shall be cut off from among their people. If you go to Ezekiel, he dedicates like a whole chapter to people that are doing this, and I don't even, like, anyway, that's all I'll say about that, but apparently it was a big deal. And thou shalt not uncover the nakedness of thy mother's sister, nor thy father's sister, for he uncovereth his near kin. They shall bear their iniquity. And if a man shall lie with his uncle's wife, he hath uncovered his uncle's nakedness. They shall bear their sin. They shall die childless. And if a man shall take his brother's wife, it is an unclean thing. He hath uncovered his brother's nakedness. They shall be childless. Ye shall therefore keep all my statutes and all my judgments, and do them in the land whither I bring you to dwell therein. That the land whither I bring you to dwell in there, spew you not out. And so, there's a pretty good sampling there, right, of all these different things that we're seeing here. Of course, we're used to quoting verse 13, if a man lie with mankind as he lieth with a woman, both of them have committed abomination, they shall surely be put to death, blood be upon them. We see some of these things in Romans 1. All right, some of these things that the Bible says is worthy of death. Now you look and say, well, look, there's stories in the Bible where men committed some of these sins and they weren't put to death. Yeah, well, that's the grace of God. That's the mercy of God, or the mercy of the people, or the government that was there at that time. Certainly there are people in our society today committing some of these sins, not being put to death. They wouldn't even think about putting someone to death for some of these sins. that's not the issue. This isn't a message that says, hey, we got to put these people to death. This is just saying that, hey, it's worthy of death. The Bible makes that very clear. So Romans chapter 1, it says that these guys are not only do these things, but they have pleasure in those that do them. Look at verse 30 again. Romans 1, verse 30. It says, backbiters, a list of things. These are the current. This is the current condition of fools. So we're just looking at different attributes. Backbiters, haters of God, despiteful, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents. Why did I look at that one? Okay, I'm sorry. Haters of God. Here's the next part. Haters of God. This is people that are worthy of death. One person would be those who hate God, those who worship other gods, they go after other gods. We saw that in Leviticus 20. They are worthy of death. Verse 23, back up a little bit. They changed the glory of an uncorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man, and to birds, and a four-footed beast, and creeping things. Look, this is a grave sin, abomination of God, and something that's worthy of death. The fool, what are some of these things he does that are worthy of death? He's a sexual pervert, right? And of course, this includes, according to Romans 1, homosexuality and other type of sexual deviations. We read about some of those in Leviticus that aren't even mentioned here. We did read that one part about a man having his father's wife, right? 1 Corinthians 5 talks about that. But look, some of these things in Leviticus, you're like, where do we even see that? How about homosexuality? You see it in a couple lists, but you're like, where do you ever see somebody in the Bible, who is other than Sodom and Gomorrah? That's the big picture that we have. Who are these things? It seems almost like who would do that? I imagine for many years people read the Bible and thought, does that even go on? Are there really people that wicked? But different times in our culture, in our society, obviously the Romans, the Greeks, there were times when they were full of this sin. And so during this time that Paul's writing this, obviously it was something that people were doing. And it went back all the way to the time of Moses, obviously. And so here's what another thing that we see here in Romans 1 that goes with this is that he's without natural affection, verse 31, without understanding, covenant breakers, without natural affection. That could mean lots of things, all right? But here's somebody who just doesn't have that natural love that we would have for, for instance, a desire or attraction to the opposite sex. That's natural, okay? A desire for a mother to love her child is natural. A desire for a man to protect a child is natural. A desire, I just read this word the other day. I don't know if this is a new thing. Maybe I'm just behind in the times, but apparently it's not politically correct to call somebody a pedophile. So now they call it minor attracted person. Can you believe that? They got a name, a minor attracted person. Not natural, right? Worthy of death. This person, if he's going after somebody who is not, mature, then that shouldn't be a natural thing. God put a desire for us to be attracted to somebody that we can be with and we can have children with and we can give our life to and all that. Now, and again, natural affection can mean lots of things. I think people have an unnatural affection. I hope I don't offend anybody here, but because this is something that will offend people in our society now more than anything I've recently found out. But people have an unnatural affection with their animals, right? It's beyond just a pet. They're like members of the family to the extent that it's just like that's unnatural. That's what I believe. Again, I'm not saying you're a fool and a reprobate or something like that if you love your animals. I'm just saying this fool has unnatural affection. Right? Verse 29 says he's a murderer. He's a murderer. I believe that there are a lot of people wandering around in this world, but even in the United States, we could just pinpoint the United States, who wouldn't think twice about murdering somebody if they could get away with it. The only thing that stops them is that they don't know how to hide the body. They don't know how to get away with the surveillance from the surveillance cameras. They don't know how to do the interrogation, and they're like, it's just too much work. But I'm telling you, there are people that wouldn't think twice about it. They think about it, they watch it on TV, they glorify in it, they can't wait for the opportunity to kill if they had a chance. This is definitely the the epitome of a fool here that does all these things. This is the end result. Look at verse 30. He's disobedient to his parents. Backbiters, haters of God, despiteful, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents. We read that in Leviticus 20. Someone's cursing their parents. If they're disobeying them, I'm not going to preach on that particular law in the Old Testament, but they could take them before the elders, and the elders could stone them with stones for disobeying their parents. And the idea was, again, if you're watching these people do that and there's something wrong with these people, you say, oh, that's a mental illness. It's still according to what God is saying here in His Word, let their blood be upon them, because if they're doing this, it's better for society that they're not even there. That's why they're worthy of death. That's why He told them to, when they went into the promised land, to do those things. Now, I'm not telling anybody in here, obviously, to take it in your own hands to kill somebody who is doing any of these things. I'm just saying that the fool is somebody who not only does these things, but takes pleasure in them, just loves these things. The things that God says He hates, to the point of you need to get those out of your land and put these people to death if they're going to do them. All right, B, the current condition of the fool, he lacks the ability to understand or reason. There's a lot of verses in the Bible. In fact, in Sunday school in Iola on Sunday, for the Sunday school class, I'm going to do a study on the fool. I've already done a lot of it. The Bible talks about fools a lot. Different meanings, different ways in which he's using fool. It's not always talking about, this Romans 1 type fool. But it's quite interesting. But when you think about somebody who's foolish, if they're doing foolish, it's like there's no reason to even answer them sometimes, right? Answer not a fool. But anyway, I'll be looking at all those verses. So, somebody who's foolish what we're talking about here is somebody who you can't reason with them. Have you ever tried to debate with somebody who's a rejecter of God? I mean, just a total rejecter of God. Maybe they're atheist, maybe they're, I don't know, whatever, but they just reject God. It is pointless to debate with them, because you're not going to get anywhere. You won't get anywhere. They can't even reason. But they come across as so smart, don't they? Just like, oh man, that person's gone to college and they're just so smart and they know all these words and these terms and they can quote all this evidence to you and stuff like that. But then you're just like common sense, common sense things about, how the Big Bang doesn't make sense, or something that, you don't even have to spend a lot of time studying out to just be like, that doesn't make sense. You can't reason with them, because they got it, what they think is figured out in their own head, and they got it all figured out, but they're a fool, the Bible says. Okay, the Bible says in verse 31 that he's without understanding. Without understanding. And in verse 31 also says he's implacable. That's a good word to remember here, implacable. I-M-P-L-A-C-A-B-L-E, implacable. Means that, they won't be satisfied with anything. Won't be satisfied with anything. The whole, you give them an inch and they'll want a mile. This is the fool. You got a bunch of people with signs trying to get some kind of bunch of I'm not saying all liberals are reprobates, okay, but you got a bunch of liberals with signs protesting something. You can't reason with them. Right, and they're going to be there. If you try to appease them and say, okay, you know what? Here's what we'll make a truce for it here. We'll give a little bit so that you'll stop protesting or whatever. It's not going to work. Next week they're going to be back out and they're going to be asking for something else. They will never be satisfied, and yet it's so crazy that our world bends over backwards right now for these people who are just constantly just like. I guess it's that whole squeaky wheel gets the grease. I mean, they're just constantly, demanding this, demanding, more freedoms in this area, more liberty in this area. We want the right to do this, and we want this, and it's just like our world has tried to placate them, but they're not placated. I mean, our world has allowed transgender people to compete in the Olympics. The World Olympics. I mean, some council of representatives from all over the world said, yeah, we'll just let this guy compete against women and just say he's a woman, and then just beats all the women just completely, they have no chance, and then they say, oh, well, it doesn't, I mean, I don't understand what the big deal is. He's a woman. I mean, not he, but it's a woman. Like they are a woman. This whole gender thing, it's like, no, I'm not. I just saw some article ad popped up saying that so-and-so is just in trouble because he misgendered somebody. And I'm like, that's the stupidest thing. If you misgender somebody because they look like a woman and you call them a her, and people in the world is coming on you and say, oh, how dare you misgender that person? Like, they've got a mental illness. You're fine for calling them what they look like. I remember when we were having a vacation Bible school at Southwest, we got 1,000 kids there in one day. And we had to divide it up, boys and girls, boys on this side, girls on this side. And these were little kids. And I don't remember seeing any kind of years ago, but it wasn't that long ago. Well, I guess it kind of was. But anyway, I don't remember any situation where, the mom just said, hey, no, this, he was born a boy, but he's actually a woman, and actually a female, so you need to let him sit on the girl side. Nothing like that. But here's the thing, at that time, some boy would just have long hair. And when little boys have long hair, sometimes you can't tell if it's a boy or a girl, right? So the boy walking over to, and this was a little black boy, sometimes the black boy, they got such soft faces and all this kind of stuff, and they had these long braided hair. And I could have swore it was a girl. And you don't ever know, because girls wear the same clothes that the boys wear. And so he's walking over there to the girl's side, and I'm like, hey, dude, you got to sit over here. Opposite. Going over to the boys' side, I'm like, hey, you got to sit here. You're a girl. And he's like, I'm not a girl. It's just like, oh, I'm sorry. And then later on, I thought about this, and I'm like, why are we sorry? If a guy's got long hair, and you're just, oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were a girl. And he gets mad. It's like, you're the one that grew your hair out long. Do you not know that you might look like a girl if you wear long hair? But our world is so messed up. Remember that little clip where that guy's like, it's ma'am. I don't even know if it's a joke. I really thought it was like satire. Like, I thought this guy's just totally joking or something, because nobody could be that weird to get mad at a guy because he's like, you're clearly a dude. So anyway, I got off a little bit on that. But the thing that I'm saying here is that you can't placate them. And they can't listen, or you can't reason with them. They are legitimately fools, and this is what the Bible said, that they're fools. Okay, the fool. What's he look like now? He's completely untrustworthy. This is important. Okay, completely untrustworthy. Look at verse 31. Without understanding. No, I'm sorry. Without understanding, covenant breakers. You make a covenant with this fool, it doesn't mean anything because he's a covenant breaker. Verse 29, back up a little bit. Being filled with all unrighteous, fornication, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, debate, deceit, right? Deceit. He's going to deceive you. That's what he does because he's a fool. He's going to deceive you. What's the next word there? Also in verse 29, he's malignity. You know what malignity is? I guess this is, I got 1, 2, 2, 3, 3. I don't know how that happened. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So I went out of order here a little bit. But he's a backbiter. That's number 4. He whispers and talks behind your back. He's a whisperer, backbiter. You can't trust him. He's deceitful. He's malicious. Number 2 said he's malicious, which malicious means that he intends to do evil. He's got evil intent, malintent. He intends to do evil. And then it said there also that he inventor of evil things, right? And so what went through my mind is this person is going to have plans and schemes, be thinking up evil things. Right? And so this is somebody who is not trustworthy. You don't know what they're scheming. You don't know what they're planning. They're covenant breakers. They're malicious. They're deceitful. They're whisperers and backbiters. And number 5, he's malignant. The word malignant, basically a good word for that would be infiltrator. Okay, yeah, that's your blank right there. That's a good word to learn. Infiltrator. He's going to infiltrate something. Think about, you ever heard of cancer that's malignant? What does that mean? It's taking over. It's infiltrating your body, and it's a bad deal. Well, this is what this foolish person that he's describing here, foolish people, but I'm giving it personified as just one person here. This is the fool. He's malignant. Now, here's the problem. This is where, as a pastor, I don't exactly know how to deal with this issue. I remember a long time ago, back in Bible college, and these things didn't quite come up. People didn't really preach about some of these things. Nowadays, I'm going to tell you this, the majority of even independent fundamental Baptists, if you say, hey, what would you do if a homosexual walked into your congregation? They would say, well, we would just love them and preach the gospel to them and just treat them just right and all that stuff. And I remember even back then thinking, what would I do? What would I do? So now, listen, I had this conversation came up. A lot of guys in Bible college are talking about this. What would you do? You're a pastor, homosexual couple walks in your church. What would you do? A lot of people gave different answers. One of them said, well, as long as they're not just like hugging on each other and making a display and all that kind of stuff, I guess they're not hurting anybody. They can hear the preaching. And so then somebody said, oh yeah, well, what are you going to do if a couple that's living together, man and woman, they're living together, but they're not married, but they come into your service and they're hugging on each other. Will you have that same standard? Like, hey, you can come as long as you're not showing any affection, you know what I mean? And so then another person said, well, here's the deal. If they come into the church and they're a homosexual, I literally heard someone say this. If they come into the church and they're homosexual, then they're not saved. Okay? And here's what they said. And their reasoning is different than what you're thinking. They said, because if they made a profession of salvation and they remained a homosexual, then they didn't really get saved. Well, here's the problem. That's a works-based salvation. You say, well, don't you believe that if somebody is a homosexual, like they can't be saved? Well, it's not because they're homosexual. It's not because of the sin that they're doing. I hope everybody understands the whole reprobate doctrine and what it has to do with homosexuality. Look, homosexuality is not the unforgivable sin. Everybody's like quiet, like I don't know if I should amen that or whatever. Homosexuality is not an unforgivable sin. Okay, what we say when we're talking about reprobates and how the homosexual is not saved, here's what is intended whenever we say that. What we're saying is the person is a fool. They've rejected God. They're haters of God. They're all these things. And one of the attributes of them is that they are a homosexual. And so therefore, when someone says that they can't be saved, what they're saying is they're a reprobate. And that's just something that we'll talk about more in many messages probably. But they're a reprobate because of the fact that you can't reason with them. You can't, they're implacable. They're somebody who have already decided in their heart, and we'll get to this in a minute, that they don't believe in God. They don't care about God. And so God has turned them over to a reprobate mind. Those are the people we're talking about. The matter of whether it's a sin unto losing your salvation. No, we don't believe you can lose your salvation. It's a sin that, if once you do that, you can't be saved because that sin is so wicked. Look, all sin is wicked, and there are some sins that are abomination to God that people do, and they still get saved, right? And so it's not that. It's just the fact that when somebody is, and I'll just be real clear with you as a pastor, if I knew somebody said that they were a homosexual and now they've been saved and they came into church, I'm just going to be totally honest with you. What I think in my mind is, how do I know this isn't a reprobate who's deceiving us and is just trying to make it seem like, hey, no, I'm like you. I believe like you. And I'm sitting there thinking like the Bible's described what this person looks like, and you can't reason with them. You can't trust them. They're covenant breakers. They're liars and deceivers. They're whisperers and backbiters. How do I know? You can say that, well, that's true about everybody. Not really, because we're talking about something that is not natural. You know what I mean? We're talking about something that is so is so bizarre that every time you see it mentioned in the Bible, you're talking about somebody who's like a son of Belial, somebody who's like, given over to this totally like psychopathic mind, like just not even reasoning, not even being able to think. Now, this gets into the whole debate, and I want to preach a message one day about this idea of homosexuality. Can a homosexual be saved? Can somebody have committed a homosexual act and they're not reprobates? And I think people get this a little too, they make too big of a deal out of this, but that's not my point of this message. My point of this message is to say, there are people who are these fools who have totally rejected God, okay, and have reached this state. Okay, so now we need to get into the second point, which will help explain this a little bit better. Why is he even talking about this? Why is he even mentioning these people who have done all these things? And again, there's a lot of cross references we could go to that explain the same kind of situation here, but we want to find out here, this is the origin story. This is what the message is supposed to be about, right? How did this person get this way? How did this person become the fool? Well, number one, we see this in verse 19 through 20. Because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God hath showed it unto them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Okay, so this is saying that this person who became a fool, it's not like, well, it wasn't my fault. You don't understand, I was raised in a family that did this and that, and so like it's not my fault. How should I know about God? My parents were pagans. My parents were atheists or something like that. Have you ever heard anyone say that? Look, you're without excuse. Well, what if I was raised in another country where they didn't preach about Jesus and they preached something else? You're without excuse. I believe that we're going to find in Romans that God has written on the hearts of man, he's revealed himself and written himself on the hearts of man to some degree. And it says, from the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen. Now, you could say that means in time, like ever since he created it. But not only that, but he's saying all these things that are seen, like they give evidence of God, and not just that, but a person is that something that God created, right? He's part of that creation of the world. And in that person, God has even put it on our heart, I believe, that to believe in the true God, the true God. You say, well, you didn't know all the details. Look, a lot of people get saved and don't know all the details when they get saved. We're just talking about somebody who just, something in their heart says, there's a God out there. And maybe they call them different names because they don't know what to call them, but it's the true God that they're thinking about. And here's what I think, that if somebody has, okay, where was it? It says, it's not in your notes anywhere, but it's in beginning of chapter 1. He says, it's where he says, I am not ashamed. Verse 16. Nope. No, it's back. I'm sorry. 17. For therein is the righteousness of God revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the just shall live by faith. Here's what I think. If somebody, and I say that I think because I don't know, there's probably a lot of different interpretations of that, but here's what I think, that somebody by faith, they just say, like, there's a God out there and I don't know him, I can't see him, I can't understand everything about him, but there's a God out there. And then so he's just living by faith. God, I believe, is going to see that faith and is going to lead him to a better understanding of who he is. And so maybe he's going to send him a preacher, or he's going to, reveal himself some way. Look, I don't know. I'm just saying that we see a lot of examples in the Bible of that too, by the way. People that they're seeking the Lord and God leads them right to this preacher, And somehow if that person is really, something in his mind, I've heard stories of Muslims who, they just hear about these Christians and about their Bible, and they say, don't read that Bible, that's wicked. And there's something in their heart that says, you know what? That's exactly what I'm supposed to be reading. And they just try to hide and not let their family know, and then they start reading the Bible, then they start seeking these Christian pastors online or something like that, because something in their heart, the Holy Spirit, is telling them that this thing that they're banning, they're forbidding, this is exactly what you need to know. And I just believe, and again, I only have my own testimony. When I was a little bitty kid, and there was something in me that knew who God was, but didn't fully know him and didn't know how to be saved and didn't know what I had to do to be born again. But there was something in there that just was seeking him. And I believe that exists in everybody, but some people will quench it. Okay? And you meet people that lived a long time and they believe right in the gospel, but they lived a long time thinking that they have to do good works to get saved. And obviously they weren't saved whenever they were thinking that before they come to the knowledge of the truth. But they had the right heart, kind of like the Apostle Paul, and they were like doing it ignorantly. They were just thinking, like, I have to do this to be saved. And so they were relying on that, and they were trusting in that, and they were giving themselves to all these works and all that kind of stuff. But God was leading them along that whole time. Now, I'm not talking about Calvinism where God chose that and put that in that person, because I believe he put it in everybody. Then everybody has a free will to accept that or not accept that, and a lot of people just quench it. And here's what he says. This fool, how he started there, is he rejected God. Look at Psalm, well, I'll just tell you, Psalm 14:1 and 53:1, both say, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. So he did not acknowledge God. He knew God. Look at verse 19. Through 21. Because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God hath showed it unto them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse, because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Okay, so this is the main verse that's telling you what happened to this person. Why did he become a fool? Well, because he rejected God, and it says when he knew him, he glorified him not, neither was he thankful. Well, what does that mean? He knew him. Well, if he knew him, doesn't that mean he's saved? No, because in the Bible, there are a lot of people who know God, and then they reject him. I'll give you a real quick example. 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 12. 1 Samuel 2:12. Now the sons of Eli were sons of Belial. They knew not the Lord. What do you mean they didn't know the Lord? These guys were priests in the tabernacle. Their dad was Eli, high priest. What do you mean they didn't know who the Lord was? They stood there at the temple all the time. They knew what the law said about him. It's not that they didn't know who he was. It's not that they didn't have, something in their heart that was pricking their heart and saying, like, this is true. They just suppressed that, and they decided that they didn't want to acknowledge who he was. They didn't want to give glory to him. They didn't want to be thankful for his creation, all that kind of stuff. So they just suppressed that, and they knew him, but they glorified him not as God. And what did it say? Their hearts became, well, that's kind of the next point. They didn't give glory to God, and it was not thankful. Okay, what else about the fool? He held the truth in unrighteousness. This is interesting. Look at verse 18. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness. Now, this is interesting. I looked in what this means about holding the truth. And as often I am, whenever I do this study and I'm kind of puzzled about something and what the word means and all that kind of stuff, I said, I'm curious what the modern translations say. Because 9 times out of 10, all the modern translations will disagree with the King James, and I'll do a little bit of study and I'll be like, hey, the King James was right. all those modern versions were wrong. And sometimes it's a big deal, sometimes it's not a big deal. But here's what I started looking at that, what do you think the other versions say? It says, let me see if I can remember what it says. It says, in their unrighteousness, they suppress the truth. Something like that. In their unrighteousness, they suppress the truth. Okay? Now, doesn't hold and suppress sound like two different things? It sounds like opposites. And it's funny how often that happens in modern translations and the King James. And I know where it comes from, because hold can mean to suppress. For instance, hold your peace. What does that mean? Like, be quiet, right? Don't say anything. Hold your peace. Hold can have to do with suppress, but hold can also be like, I held on to something. Like, the Bible uses it both ways. And here you're like, well, what does it mean? Well, if you go back to the Greek and try to put that in there to be what it means, you're kind of left to say, like, which one does it mean? Which one do I want to pick? Now, the thing is, that works, okay? It kind of works. Like, they suppressed, how does it say again? They, what verse was it? Verse 18. Yeah, right. So, yeah, in their unrighteousness, they suppress the truth. Okay, here's what I think it means. I literally think it means they hold the truth, okay? But they hold it in unrighteousness. They don't actually take it in. They've got access to it. They hold it, but they don't actually make it theirs, okay? So they know who God is. He's available to everybody, but everybody doesn't necessarily pick up that truth, pick up that gospel of Jesus Christ and pick him up and receive him. Okay, so here's what it says. Here's what I got in the notes here. Acts chapter 17. This is a famous famous passage where Paul is preaching to, my mind went blank here. He's in Athens, and he's preaching chapter 17. And there's this great discourse. Let's start with verse 24. And he stood in the midst of verse 22. Then Paul stood in the midst of Mars Hill and said, You men of Athens, I perceive that in all things you are too superstitious. For as I passed by and beheld your devotions, I found an altar with the inscription, To the unknown God, whom therefore ye ignorantly worship. Him declare I unto you, God that made the world and all things therein, seeth that he is Lord of heaven and earth, dwelleth not in temples made with hands, neither is worship with men's hands as though he needed anything, seeing he giveth to all life and breath and all things, and hath made of one blood all nations of men for to dwell on all the face of the earth, and hath determined the times before appointed and the bounds of their habitation, that they should seek the Lord, if haply, not happily, but haply, like, happenstance kind of an idea, haphazard, haply, they might feel after him and find him, though he be not far from every one of us. Every single person, I believe salvation is in their grasp. We know that. All they have to do is call on the name of the Lord. All they have to do is put their faith in it. But some people, even though it's in their grasp, they will not hold on to it. They will refuse that, and then they will become a fool. And so this is a great passage here. He's speaking to these people who have no knowledge of the God of the Bible. They have no knowledge of Jesus Christ. They have no knowledge of any of those things. But he's saying, look, you're kind of on the right path. You have this unknown God, right? And he's like, I'm going to declare the unknown God. Like, he can't dwell in a temple, and he can't be put into a statue. He can't be made out of wood or stone or anything like that. Look, he's a God that just exists. And you know this in your heart. You know that there's a God. Look, it's so interesting to me. Like, I'm not saying that this can prove God to somebody. Because again, if you're talking to a fool, you're not going to be able to convince them. They've already rejected in their hearts. Okay, but think about this. Does eternity exist? I think everybody knows that eternity exists. Things are going to go on forever. You're like, well, what if the earth explodes? Then it would just cease to maybe exist for anybody that was on the earth, because we'd all be dead, but it would still go on, right? There would still be some. And what about, like, where did it come from? Well, they say, well, the Big Bang. Well, what was going on before that? Well, nothing, just time and everything just started. Like, any reasonable person knows in their heart eternity exists. I believe that. I believe that. And if you know in your heart that eternity exists, then you must believe in God, because there's got to be this being who's eternal, because any matter that existed forever had to come from somewhere. Well, maybe that matter is God because it's eternal, but there's something that's eternal. There's got to be a God. We know because we realize that there are certain attributes that people have, we have this knowledge of perfection in our mind. Now, none of us will reach perfection, but it's almost like this understanding that we have that there's somebody out there who's perfect, who is perfectly doing all these things, and that perfection exists somewhere. And you can just go down the line of all these attributes, and it's somewhere in our heart, we know that it exists. And so he's speaking to people who have never heard the gospel, never heard of anything, but they know God. In their heart, they know God, and they're just suppressing him and not acknowledging him. Okay, now they don't know the gospel of Jesus Christ. That still has to be preached to them, and Paul's about to preach it to them. But they do know in their heart that they shouldn't be worshiping these dumb idols. Okay, they do know in their heart that God can't exist in this little space or something like that. And so I believe it's written on their heart, and they got to live by faith, and then God will reveal them more. Then they have to have faith in that next step of the way. Somebody will preach the gospel, they have to have faith to receive that gospel. Okay, so he knew God, but didn't know him, quote unquote. He did not give God glory, was not thankful. He held the truth in unrighteousness. This would make him what 2 Peter, you don't have to go there, but 2 Peter 3:3 says these are willingly ignorant. The fool, the people that we're talking about, they're willingly ignorant. Like they know better, but they don't want to know. And so they have decided to reject God, and they're willingly ignorant. Okay, so the first point was pretty simple. How did the person become a fool? This kind of Romans 1 fool. They did not acknowledge God. Doesn't mean they didn't know who he was or they didn't have understanding that he exists, but they didn't want to acknowledge him. They didn't want to give him thanks. They didn't want to give him glory, give him credit where credit is due. They would rather serve the creature more than the creator. B, it goes on in verse 21 to say that his heart was darkened and his imagination vain. Okay, we can understand that. The light begins to go out. The light is darkened. His heart becomes dark, cold, shut off, calloused, the Bible says. Okay, and his heart was darkened and his imagination's vain. It's funny, if you do listen to a quote-unquote intelligent scientist, evolutionary scientist, scholar, and you do listen to them trying to explain, in their intelligent speech and just like all their knowledge and wisdom and all they do, if you listen to it, here's what it is. It's just a bunch of Star Trek, sci-fi, just crazy stuff that makes no sense. It's all just empty and vain. And it's just like, well, we all could be just characters in some video game, and we're just like some guys in his basement playing a video game, and we're not really here at all. We're just figments of them. And everyone's like, oh, what a brilliant mind. That's just stupid. That's vain. That's a vain imagination. Why? Because you don't want to give any credit to God. And so in your pride and your arrogance, you became a fool. And this is exactly how he became a fool, because he's just like, well, you ask Stephen Hawkins, Richard Dawkins, not Stephen Hawkins. Oh, he's a fool too. Well, he's in hell now, but Richard Dawkins, you say, well, do you think there's any possibility there could be intelligent life? I mean, what do you call it? Well, they say not God, but they call it a higher intelligence or something. I can't remember what they say. And he said, well, I do believe there could be something sort of like a higher evolved species of aliens out there who created us. And you guys have heard that, right? That interview. You guys know that he said that. He wasn't joking, man. I don't think he was being sarcastic. He's just like, well, there could be some kind of intelligent aliens, other life form out there that we haven't discovered yet, and maybe they put us here and they created us. But no, I won't concede that there could be a God. Why? Because you're a fool. You're willingly ignorant, and you've suppressed that, and you've refused to take in that truth. Okay, so what happened? Their heart was darkened. Their imagination became vain. We see the next step. They became proud. Look at verse 22. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. So they were professing to be wise. That sounds like pride, doesn't it? They're professing how wise they are, how intelligent they are. And man, don't be fooled by that. Don't be fooled by people who have all the titles before their name, and they have all these books that they've written, and they teach these college classes and stuff like that. That doesn't mean anything. That doesn't mean anything, okay? Because there are people who are just very proud and arrogant, and they love to be heard of men and all this, but they're just fools. Verse 30 says, they're backbiters, haters of God, despiteful, proud. Okay, this is the fool. Pride defines him. Look at Ezekiel 16. I know we're pressed for time. I don't even know what time it is, but Ezekiel 16. Most people are probably familiar with this verse. We like to talk about the Sodomites, and when it comes to, and I believe God gave that as an example. He rained down fire and brimstone on Sodom and Gomorrah and wiped them out because they were rejectors of God, right? And they were given over to a reprobate mind. And I do believe that he used that as an example. From then on, whenever you hear Sodomites, they're referring back to that time and that particular sin. But I want you to look at chapter 16 of Ezekiel. Most of you are probably familiar with it, but look verse 49. Behold, this was the iniquity. He's talking to Israel here. This was the iniquity of thy sister Sodom. Pride, fullness of bread, and abundance of idleness was in her and in her daughters. Neither did she strengthen the hand of the poor and needy. And they were haughty and committed abomination before me. Therefore I took them away as I saw good. Look, how did they get to that point where they're committing abomination? Well, it started with pride. It started with rejecting God. It started with, these vain imaginations and only selfishness, and their hearts became darkened and their imagination became vain. They became proud. Okay, and so the end result, after this pride, after their hearts darkened, they're willingly ignorant or dumb on purpose, as Kent Hovind says, then finally God gave up on the fool. God gave up on him. Look at Romans 1 again. I'll keep turning and not saving my spot. I guess that's why I got 2 ribbons in my Bible. Romans chapter 1, verse 24. Wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness through the lust of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves. Verse 26. For this cause God gave them up unto vile affections, for even their women did change the natural use into that which is against nature. And likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the women, burned in their lust one toward another, men with men, working that which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves the recompense of the error which was meet. Verse 28, and even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind to do those things which are not convenient. So here, whenever you see, verse 29 says, being filled with all unrighteousness, fornication, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness. How could somebody be filled with all those things? Now, I'm not saying that every reprobate has gotten around to doing all those things, right? But how are they filled with all that in their heart? Because their heart is just completely given over to wickedness. It can't be trusted. It can't be placated. It can't be, it's just, you can't be reasoned with. It's just, they've shut that off. And so God shut it off, I guess, but they had already refused in their heart. They're proud. They're deceitful. You can't trust them. And so God gave up on them. Now, a lot of questions, again, about the reprobate doctrine and about homosexuality in particular, I'll deal with in another sermon.